Yeah.
Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert, continuing our schedule previews for our way too early top 25 teams. And today we are heading back out to the Big 12 to take a look at the 21st ranked Iowa State Cyclones, a team that has really just thrived under Matt Campbell since he arrived in Ames, becoming relevant once again both in the Big 12 and nationally. But they're coming off a somewhat disappointing 2019 campaign where they went just 7-6. But you can't help but wonder what type of season it could have been had they been able to win the close games. Iowa State had 4 losses by 7 points or less, including a 2-point loss to Baylor, a 1-point loss to Iowa, and a 1-point loss to Oklahoma. You win all of those games, 4 of those games. Iowa State is not only making an appearance in the Big 12 championship game, but very well could have been in the hunt for a spot in the college football playoff. Which what that tells me is that the talent is certainly there for Iowa State. So many close losses that had they gone their way, Iowa State would have been an elite team in 2019 instead of just 7-6 and getting annihilated by Notre Dame in their bowl game. And luckily for them, a lot of their talent returns in 2020. Some are saying this is one of the most experienced Iowa State teams ever, and certainly could be Matt Campbell's best team he has fielded since he arrived in Ames. They get Brock Purdy back. And as we said over and over again, in Purdy, we trust. One of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12 right now. He returns, alongside their running back in Breece Hall, and arguably the best, or one of the best, tight ends in the Big 12 in Charlie Kolar. Now, they do lose their top wide receivers, a lot of them, including Deshaunte Jones. So while you're going to have Kolar right there at tight end, Purdy's going to have to build some chemistry with those wide receivers. Probably the most questionable part on this Iowa State offense, either there or alongside the offensive line. Defensively, they get Jaquan Bailey and Greg Eisworth both back. That's huge. Getting that leadership and those big guys on the defensive side of the ball is huge for the Cyclones this year. Once again, many are saying it's one of the most experienced teams that Iowa State has ever fielded, and if it is, it has a chance to be a very, very special season. We're going to take a look at their schedule here. Once again, not predicting in any sort of way, just analyzing some of their opponents, some big-time games, big stretches, stuff like that. No predictions at all. Those will come later. Opening the season against South Dakota. Luckily not South Dakota State. We know last year Iowa State struggled in Week 1 against Northern Iowa, nearly losing that game, going into 3 overtimes, but escaped with the season opening victory. Shouldn't have much issues here with South Dakota. Then, of course, in Week 2, they go to Kinnick Stadium and face off against Iowa, the in-state rivalry game. Now, of course, emotions are going to be high in this one, not just because of the rivalry itself, but also because of what happened last year. Iowa State beat themselves last year. College game day was in town for the first time ever, and the Cyclones lost 18-17. They had many chances to win that game or to take advantage of failures by Iowa State, mistakes by Iowa, and Iowa State could not capitalize. They beat themselves. So now they go to Kinnick Stadium, which is one of the most difficult places to play in all of college football, especially at night, to face off against a Kirk Ferentz team that once again will be one of the best in the Big Ten, or will be contending in the Big Ten, especially in that wide open West. So a big game here, not one that we have in our key stretch that we'll get to, but certainly one that's always circled on both Iowa and Iowa State's calendars, and in Week 2 will be huge on getting that season off on the right foot. They get UNLV Week 3, so there's a chance Iowa State could be either 3-0 or 2-1, more than likely, going into conference play on September 26th against Texas Tech. And this, to me, is where the key stretch for Iowa State begins. This is going to be one of the toughest stretches and probably the defining stretch of Iowa State's season, where they can either go, 7-win season again, 7-5, or maybe they can get over the hump and finally have an 8 or 9 win regular season. I think that will be defined right here. So we start with Texas Tech, and it ends with Oklahoma. The stretch there is key. 4 games. Iowa State split those 2 games last year. They defeated Texas Tech. They defeated Kansas. Lost to Oklahoma State by 7, one of those one-possession games we talked about. And then, of course, losing to Oklahoma after a remarkable comeback, going for 2 to get the win in Norman. Couldn't get it to go, losing 42-41. With Texas Tech, Iowa State won 34-24. They get them in Ames this year. So they were able to go into Lubbock, win last year. Now the Red Raiders are returning the favor and coming to Ames. I would think many people had this circled as a win on Iowa State's calendar. But Matt Wells and Texas Tech, I think, played a little bit better than I think some expected in 2019. Some may have expected a bowl game. They obviously didn't get that. But I think Matt Wells is well on his way to getting Texas Tech to consistently making the postseason. Very well could be this year in 2020. So first conference games are always a big deal, are always kind of tricky for some teams. That's part of the reason Texas Tech is in this stretch, and because I do believe the Red Raiders will take a step forward this year. They then go on the road to Kansas. Lawrence take on Les Miles and the Jayhawks. Iowa State won this game 41-31 last year. So great, you got a win. You also allowed 31 points to Kansas. And we mentioned in our Texas schedule preview that Iowa State has kind of become that thorn in everybody's side in the Big 12. They're very difficult to beat, whether it's on the road or at home. Certainly a very difficult place to play in Ames. Kansas is kind of doing the same thing under Les Miles. Yeah, they went 3-9 last year. That's nothing to brag about. But they did have 3 games decided by 1 possession, so they could have been a bowl team. And they gave people fights and contended in games that they probably should not have. One of those was that game against Texas. And I just look right here for Iowa State. Yes, they beat Kansas by 10 last year, 41-31. Had to score a lot of points to get that win. They go to Lawrence, a Kansas team that should take a step forward, a team that's going to rely heavily on Puka Williams at running back. Not saying Iowa State's going to lose this game at all. I'm not saying they're winning or losing any of these games, of course. But I'm saying this is a potential trap game, especially with big games coming up ahead of them in Oklahoma State and Oklahoma. I hate that they have back-to-back road games here. I will say that. I don't like back-to-back road games for anybody. But you've got that here with Oklahoma State, a team that Iowa State lost to 34-27 last year, heartbreaking fashion. And now the Cowboys under Mike Gundy have one of the most dangerous trios in the entire country, and Spencer Sanders at quarterback, Chuba Hubbard at running back, and Tylan Wallace at wide receiver. They're going to have one of the best offenses in the Big 12, maybe even in the country. This is an Oklahoma State team that we have very high on our way to early top 25, and many could have making the Big 12 championship. Iowa State has to travel to Stillwater to take them on after losing at home to them last year. And then, of course, Oklahoma, finally, still the kings of the Big 12 until someone can dethrone them. Nearly got dethroned by Baylor, couldn't get dethroned by Texas. Yes, they lose a lot of key pieces, namely Jalen Hurts, CeeDee Lamb. But Spencer Rattler more than likely going to come in, take over at quarterback, and do just fine because that's what they do at Oklahoma. That's what Lincoln Riley does with his squad at Oklahoma. The key here, though, is that they're coming to Ames. And if Iowa State exceeds expectations, and maybe they're 3-0 after that first stretch there, and maybe they only lose to Oklahoma State, so they're looking at 5-1, 4-2, it's going to be a pretty big showdown here. One that could greatly shape the Big 12 conference standings and determining whether or not Iowa State can slip into that championship game or not. Ames is such a difficult place to play. A few years ago, they went into Norman and won. Almost went to Norman last year, or they did go into Norman and win. Nearly went into Norman and won last year, and then gave Oklahoma a fight in between in Ames a few years ago. This year expected to be a little bit different. Oklahoma taking some steps back, losing some key pieces. Not saying Iowa State's going to win, but I would be terrified if I were the Sooners. Just setting that one out there. 2 home games, sandwiched in between those are 2 road games. Key stretch for Iowa State here. That is going to be the key for them. First half of the season is big, but you've got tough games at Iowa, at Oklahoma State, trap game, I think, at Kansas. That 4-game stretch will be the difference maker in a mediocre season or a very, very special one. The rest of the year, not too bad. After the bye week, 3 of their final 5 games are at home. 60% of those games are at home. And they're big ones. Kansas State, a team that Iowa State lost to last year in the season finale. They come to Ames after a week of rest. potentially after a monumental win over Oklahoma. So that's going to be huge for them, trying to get a win over Chris Kleiman and the Wildcats. Baylor, a team that Iowa State lost to by 2 last year, comes to Ames, and a team that will probably take a step back from that 11-win season last year. And then West Virginia, of course, Iowa State annihilated them 38-14 in 2019. But Neil Brown's squad will certainly take a step in the right direction, maybe even get to the postseason. But that's in the season finale. Toughest game in that stretch is on the road against Texas, and Iowa State beat them 23-21 last year. Now, Austin, not an easy place to play by any means, but, anything can happen. Kansas almost went in there and did it. Kansas State almost went in there and did it last year. If Texas disappoints in 2020 like they did in 2019, by this point in the season, Iowa State could catch them napping, maybe have a little bit more to play for, and pull off a big-time upset. But that's arguably the toughest game there. The schedule is not ideal for Iowa State by any means. Big 12 is becoming more difficult by the day. And when you have a non-conference game at Iowa, which is tough, at Oklahoma State, at Texas, and of course Oklahoma, which can win just about anywhere, we can see why the FPI might have them going 7-5. And that's what they have them going right now. Early FPI projections have the Cyclones finishing the season 7-5, which is what they went last year before their bowl loss. To some, that would be a major disappointment. For others, that would be great. It's another bowl appearance, decent bowl appearance, and Matt Campbell is continuing to do his job. But I think this Iowa State team has more potential than that. I think they've got a little bit more in them than 7-5. And I can very well see them pulling off some upsets, maybe winning some games that people don't think they should, and turning that 7-5 record into potentially an 8-9 win season if they're lucky, even better. This team is still in the top tier of the Big 12 and could very well make the Big 12 championship. The talent is certainly there. They're not saying they're one of the most experienced teams they've had for nothing. The experience is there. Matt Campbell just has to take advantage of it. So guys, thank you so much for watching us here on YouTube. Iowa State schedule preview. We're almost really about 25% of the way, or 20% through our top 25 here. We start number 20 tomorrow. So make sure not to miss out on that. Make sure to please continue to like, comment, subscribe. Check out everything in the description below. We've got exclusive college football content, news, and offers you do not want to miss. So check it all out. And once again, as always, thank you for watching. And we will see you next time right here at the Gridiron Expert.